Okay, so we're slowly going to start, but this is going to be a scary panel, but it won't be as scary once you get used to it. So normal panels, you have a selection of wise people, and they talk about the subject.
We have beards.
Yes, some of you. This time we're going to start with the selection of people, and then every time someone asks a question, they will go to sit on the panel. And it'll change in a first-in, first-out order.
So round robin, right?
Yes. I mean, there's no order to start with, but yeah. So, would you like to join the panel? And there's one more volunteer.
Why don't you?
Ryan.
Mihao, why don't you just?
Mihao, you should be on the panel.
I've already asked. I'll ask a question. Don't worry.
Good.
I'll interject no matter where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
It's a personality trait.
You said?
Yeah. Should we introduce ourselves, or?
Yeah, I think so. That'll be good. Great.
Hi, I'm Carter Schoenwald. You may have seen me wearing a hat on the internet. By day, I'm like the research lead on a bunch of next-gen, vaguely blockchain-related or applied math-related efforts at JP Morgan. I do a bunch of open source stuff. I've been happily using Cabal New Build for 2+ years. And I help maintain a bunch of core libraries in Haskell and I have lots of opinions.
So hi, I'm Jacob. By day, I'm doing my PhD at the University of Edinburgh with, I'm doing it in gradual typing in blame calculus, and by night I'm working at a startup and we're trying to use functional programming to, I like to save lives, but it's not necessarily true at the moment. We're trying to earn some money by...
Sanely engineering a thing?
Yeah. We're a medical startup, so I guess saving lives is hidden somewhere in there.
It saves money if you save lives.
Definitely.
My name is Ryan Moore. I work at a company called MX, and we do basically a lot of things with financial data and financial UIs. So I'm a working programmer and primarily spending my time on the front end, and I'm just a true lover and connoisseur of all things functional programming, in particular Haskell.
My name is Julie Moranicki. I'm one of the authors of Haskell Book. I'm not a working programmer, really, but by day I homeschool my kids mostly, and I do some contract work, mostly technical writing, and by night I am working on a second book called Joy of Haskell, which is an intermediate Haskell book, and Chris and I have started Haskell and Nick's education website called typeclasses.com. That's it. I love Haskell too, like all of us here.
Okay, so I have a change in the rules. So
You can't change the rules once it's started.
No, we made the rule that he can change the rules.
Yeah. So any time the question is asked, I'll run a random number generator that uses cosmic rays, apparently. And then there's a 1 in a third chance you'll get to sit on the panel. More exciting.
Randomly evicting or randomly selected?
Well, the person to evict will be chosen by the panel, I guess, and once we have an order, it will be round robin.
Okay. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, basically. So we're going to talk about the future of functional programming. So if you have a question, you can roll the dice. No? Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
So
I have an opinion.
We don't care about opinions, we want facts. Or fact-based opinions.
So I got into functional programming a couple of years ago, and...
1 second. Do you need a mic though?
No, there's a microphone here.
Okay.
But in general, yes. Yeah, it will be fine.
So I got into functional programming a couple of years ago, and at the beginning, no one really knew what it was. A couple of people had some opinions, but mostly not really. And it's been growing, although the growth is kind of lower than I hoped for. So how do you see the next interval you can project? Or do you think it will still be getting more popular, maybe not, maybe people will abandon it?
So, since my main job around Haskell is as a purveyor.
I got it too. I'm not.
Oh, you're choosing who's answering the question?
No.
Okay.
I just got it too.
I have the microphone. I get to talk. So, as a purveyor of Haskell and Nix now, educational materials, I think that the market is just growing and growing and growing in terms of people who want to learn functional programming. In terms of getting companies to let people write Haskell, I think that's a much more difficult story, and maybe somebody else would like to talk about that.
Companies want you to solve their shit and do so in a timely, effective, evolvable way. If functional programming helps you do that, just fucking do it. I mean, businesses are for providing a service, and ideally an environment where you're okay with the people you're around every day. Choose the tool. Do people tell you which hammer to use when you're trying to hammer a thing? No, you say, here's the one that lets me do this effectively and not injure my wrist. I'm going to use it. Why? There are oftentimes constraints involving other social or anthropological concerns, so make them trust you better. Because it's not a technical problem of using the right tools, it's an anthropological issue of having the right trust relationship. Be trustable and build great shit that solves people's problems in exchange for money.
And also, over the last couple of years, we noticed that many languages that were not functional to begin with suddenly became functional. You have lambdas in Java, you have lambdas in C++. So we can sort of see how
it's osmosing.
Yeah, it's osmosing. The rest of the world is catching up to all the stuff in academia. I guess the next big thing will be to see how more complicated things get adapted in real world.
They'll still be 20 years old by the time they're adopted, though. But, well, that's a good filter.
So there are some exceptions. For instance, gradual typing took awfully short.
Oh, yeah.
That took a couple of years.
Is that Infer and TypeScript?
TypeScript mostly.
Okay.
So I thought Infer was not necessarily gradual typing.
Yeah, it's mostly flow and some TypeScript.
Wait. Infer is the Hoare logic for static analysis thing.
What do you mean by whore?
Tony Hoare. He's the biggest whore I know. Well, actually, it's not Hoare logic. It was separation logic, which lets you sort of reason about sort of concurrent, non-interfering pieces of state, so it works better. But they're related.
I really, as someone who works a lot on the front end, it's a very chaotic place. It's a place where a lot of things can go wrong. And so, particularly around 2.5, 3 years ago, I started trying to get really serious about finding better ways to solve the problems that I was experiencing every day. And started as part of that looking into functional programming. And I think a lot of people on the front end around that time started making a shift towards it. And so we've seen a number of different initiatives and languages that have embraced to one level or other a lot of ideas that originated with Haskell. And even in situations where you're using vanilla JavaScript, like was mentioned before, these ideas have become so much more powerful and part of our everyday lives. But also, the more that I think that as a much younger programmer, I was constantly looking for the one right way to do things, and I thought much more in terms of absolutes or wrongs and rights. And I think that
trade-offs.
The pragmatism of reality now is something that I'm more interested in. And I think that's where the future of functional programming as well will end up, where applications where safety is critical, saving lives, in many places, financial applications, just naturally migrate to safer languages with more assurances, and applications where these things aren't critical, perhaps the benefits of such an environment are not worth the cost of education or implementation. And so I guess we'll see. I hope that we continue to find ways to, it's the resources such as Haskell Book have made it possible for people like me who are working stiffs, to learn these pretty amazing abstractions. And I hope that effort continues to be spent in that area and also rewarded, because it's very difficult work. And it's one of the things that I hope to contribute in the future as well.
I would like to just add on to that functional programming isn't necessarily about high insurance. It's about the whole is a comprehensible product or sum of its parts. And a lot of the really exciting stuff, like including what Jacob is involved with as one vein of research, is really about how do you make it easy to evolve and grow interesting, complex applications cheaply. And there's a lot of organizations where you see huge investment in things where they actually kind of are like, move fast and million monkeys this shit, Facebook, where they actually add sort of lightweight verification to every piece of code that when it ever gets revisited. Some of these things remain untouched for years, but then they're like, oh, let's modernize it to our hack that we call hack or whatever. But I think it's really important to emphasize that there's a lot of ways of having reliable software that are lightweight and cheap and actually just help you not worry that reality's melting off your nose when you're debugging. Anyways.
Okay.
Questions?
My question is to Julie. In your consultancy, people who come to you, are these the grassroots interest from individual developers, or is it companies as well?
So it really started off and has mostly been. Do you want me to repeat the question, or do you think it was?
Please repeat. I didn't hear it.
Okay. So he asked if, in my experience in my consultancy, if most of the interest is like a grassroots individual developers wanting to learn Haskell, or if it's mostly coming from companies. So it definitely started mostly from individuals. There has been an increasing number of companies, mostly small ones, but not always, who have expressed interest, and we've sold Haskell Book to a lot of companies at this point for they have a group internal study session or something, but it definitely started, and I mean most of the sort of momentum has been from individuals, most of whom don't work in Haskell and don't have a Haskell job when they start. It's just kind of curiosity, and then but the best thing is when after they've read Haskell Book, and then it's like people just get to the Monad chapter, and then we get this email saying, oh, I got a Haskell job, and then they stop reading the book. But I mean, that was their goal, right, to get good enough at Haskell to get a job. So but yeah, most of it's been from individuals. I think there is just a real I think there's a lot of frustration people have with the tools that they use at work, and so even if they know that it might be a while before they could get a Haskell job and use something functional at work, at least in their free time, their side projects, their hobby programming, right? They want to be experimenting with different tools and seeing what else is out there. So that's where most of the interest has come so far. So one of my big things about the future of functional programming is I really think that, and I'm making every effort possible, there need to be more people for whom a functional language like Haskell is their first language. It was mine, so obviously I'm biased, but I really think that there's a lot of hope and future there. Does anybody else want to? I mean, the question was for me, but if you have opinions.
What was what was the actual question again?
Whether most of the interest in learning Haskell or functional languages has come from individuals or from companies.
I think that ties into another thing, which is to what extent is learning a new language the actual hard part. And I feel like a lot of the challenges people ascribe to Haskell are they're just encountering people using other sort of parallel universes of vocabulary that are really useful because there's a lot of pedagogic materials around them to describe something that isn't really described elsewhere. You don't need to know category theory ever to do interesting programming. But it's a very powerful vocabulary, and when you're writing something complicated, you're like, oh wait, this is a metric monoidal category. Sweet! It's not that you're like, oh, it looks like the method. It's, oh, it resembles this well-studied structure. Maybe I'm designing it right. There's other ways of doing it, but I think in terms of large orgs, it's really about how the ease at which other people can understand and app some code base. And that's just, again, a sort of education in how much are you actually communicating with other people. And there's appetite for like educating teams and organizations into new ways of doing engineering, whatever, but it has to be in the context of what resources and time scales and deadlines they have available, because resources are finite. Next question, I guess.
What do you see as the main roadblocks to adopting functional languages? Haskell in particular is maybe interesting.
Roadblocks to adopting functional programming where?
In companies.
Building shit that solves the problem and makes them money. Just do that. They don't care about the details as long as it works and other people on the engineering team feel comfortable with it. Why are they telling you what clawhammer to use? It just delivers shit.
So I've just been having a conversation today with a friend via Twitter. So he works for a place that has a Haskell team. They have some other teams as well who don't do Haskell. And this Haskell team has been working on something that sort of, they got into some fancy types tomfoolery and failed to deliver. And then the boss said, all right, just no more Haskell. These Haskell people keep screwing around with all these fancy types.
They didn't deliver.
And they didn't deliver. And I think that that's absolutely right. I mean, you just have to deliver. And so if you are on a Haskell team, if you are one of the lucky people who gets to write Haskell at work, make sure you deliver on it. Don't get distracted by the fancy types. Don't, right? Because it's also then becomes a problem of onboarding new people, right? If there is some turnover in your team and you can't explain how this, servant thing is working, then they're going to have a lot harder time adopting. So you can do...
And that also ties into the trust issue.
Yeah.
You have to have your management trust you.
Yeah.
And you have to deliver.
Yeah.
Nothing else solves it. Not doing that breaks anything else you try.
Yeah, and like Chris was showing you with what how we built type classes, or showing not all of you because you weren't all in his session, but we built this whole website off of extremely simple things. The only web framework library that we're using is Scotty, and everything else is built on top of that. There's no. I mean, there are times when something like Yesod is appropriate, but there are also times when you just need just really simple services, and so you can totally keep things simple in Haskell and not get into the type level tomfoolery, which is a lot of fun and interesting to study, but I think we'd have a lot more adoption by companies if we could rein in those impulses a little bit.
I mean, but that's just, in some sense, be an adult. What's an engineer? Someone who builds a thing that works. And just figure out, if there's trade-offs, say, hey, if you need it sooner, here's the ways it might fail. Is that acceptable? And then engineer subject to knowing your customer or client has accepted that trade-off. I personally, when I'm building something without explicit discussion about trade-offs, don't do the trade-offs, which is very different from a lot of folks. And that has hurt me in the past when I've done freelancing at points. And I learned to sort of say, what is the smallest, simplest thing that is not going to be fully general, that works for different timescales? And how do I just build that so I can address those issues as I evolve it if it's valuable? That's all.
So one of the things that got me really excited about Haskell in particular was at one of the first couple of meetups at the Utah Haskell meetup, this software engineer named Levi Pearson, who had been doing a lot of it, demoed this IRC client that he had written in Haskell. And the last time he had worked on it had been like seriously like 18 months or 2 years before. And all of a sudden he was like, wait, what are all these people like interested in Haskell? And he showed up and he like installed installed new dependencies, and like everything just broke. And he showed us walking through the process of refactoring to make it work.
Deep bit rotting Haskell code is a pleasure.
Yeah, it blew my mind. I had never seen anyone do anything like that with software. And asking me to walk back to a project that I've written like 6 months ago with the best possible way that I know how to, with JavaScript, feels like a nightmare. Like,
I mean,
at that point, I would rather start from fresh than just try to go back and fix the stuff that I'd written, right? And I think that's where a lot of the real demonstrable financial value can be given to a company, is where if you can get management to understand that the art of writing software and the cost of writing software is going to be overwhelmingly in the domain of maintaining, and that by giving a little bit extra time and thought up front to producing will save tons and tons of money and effort over the long term, and also make predictions of the cost of changes discoverable, right? I think that any of us who work in dynamic software systems of any considerable size understand that estimates are
fan fiction.
Laughable, right? It's a myth. It's a myth.
It's slash fan fiction of that's no way. I'll redact that.
But adopting technologies like Haskell can reduce the mythology and bind those estimates closer to reality. But just like the others have said before, when you ask a company to adopt any new technology, you're putting both your reputation on the line, and it's a risk, right? And so you need to make sure that you understand the domain that you're working in and the problem, so that you're not, and that you're a good enough Haskeller or
engineer or whatever.
Yeah, that you can deliver, as said before, that you understand.
You actually hit a very important point too, though. Risk. So he just hit a very important point. To what extent is the engineering domain one that you're already otherwise super competent familiar with, or are you building something new for you, or just genuinely new? If it's the latter, you need to make sure that your management understands you're doing real research engineering. This is a very important thing. I've been involved in that, and some fuck ups are on me. But some are also just, you need to make sure that the business you are working with that wants this totally new thing that's never been made before understands that it just even developing the competency to get something initially working and then figure out how to evolve it into this useful artifact that they can then sort of run with and sort of treat as a line engineering tool isn't zero. You need to and there's also like a sort of parallel thing. So you hit a very good point. My experience with folks who are like new to functional programming development or languages akin to Haskell, they are shocked at how cheap refactoring is. But that's true of any reasonably expressive, higher-kinded, friendly, type classy language. Usually that sounds like Haskell, but it's not the only one.
What others are?
I'm a little bit invested in Haskell. I mean, like, I'm a Hackage trustee. I'm on the Haskell 2020 committee. I forgot to mention that earlier. Anyways, but you really need to make sure people understand the risks and traps. Now, there's also a really important other methodological thing. And so I taught myself a lot of PL research many, many moons ago. And the most important thing I took away from that isn't really, use Haskell. It's when you're working on a problem, whether you understand the domain or not, what is it you or some other domain expert or user wants to say? What does that mean? How does it work? How do you sort of make that explicit version of it that's computable? The more you can make your domain a vocabulary that happens to be computable, the more you're actually really leveraging all those ideas that functional programming is a proxy for. Functional programming is just really a proxy for how do we build things that map to the meaning of our intent and make sure our expression of intent matches the desired meaning. How do you say what you want to say for that problem? What does it mean? How does it work? How does it not work? How well can you approximate given your time and engineering complexity budget?
And also,
Yeah.
I mean, to sort of sum it up, because I believe it was sort of said between the lines, if you're interested in Haskell and new to Haskell, I encourage you to contribute in your spare time to some open source project.
Oh, you learn so much.
Do not choose a project that you're supposed to be paid for as a vehicle to learn Haskell, because if you come from a different background, there will be some ups and downs, and you will experience a paradigm shift after which you will have to adjust yourself. And
There's absolutely, it's like when you go to engineering school and the upperclassmen teach you how to think about a problem.
Yeah.
It's exactly that, right?
And you do not want to do that under the pressure of finishing your project and needing to deliver that and get paid for that. Because Haskell is a nice language, and also there's a lot of interesting and shiny things in it. And there are also
it takes time to digest.
Yeah, but there are also many rabbit holes that you can end up in. And
It's only experience that really helps.
yeah, you need at least at the very early stage, you need some senior person. There's a really good community both on Reddit and IRC, and profit from that. Use that. Do not sort of get closed and try to deliver over time because you want to sort of show everybody at your company that Haskell is a better choice, even though it might be.
That sounds manic, doesn't it?
I believe that many computer scientists are still prone to this sort of reaction.
Okay. And actually, to sort of build on what you're just saying, I can't speak for other people, but and Jacob was alluding to this. I've learned so much from all the really sharp folks who have sort of cycled in and out of the Haskell open source community. And there are other very intellectually curious, interesting communities. I don't really care about your catahylomorphism. Also, I think though everyone sort of only mentions those as a joke these days. Ignoring folds and induction and stuff. But open source can give you a channel to talk and interact with and get feedback from smart people that don't live in your head and aren't in the same building or office as you. And good ideas you should grab, and good feedback you should grab as much as you can, while sort of making sure that other people feel good about interacting with you. Should we do another question?
Yeah, we could. Where's Michael?
Do we have questions? Questions.
It's kind of similar, I guess, but we had some good advice about dealing with management. What about other programmers who sometimes are ideologically attached to a particular
You mean they're a dick? If they're a dick, I don't know, that's a personal choice how you deal with unpleasant coworkers or intellectually uncurious coworkers.
What if they're pleasantly attached to a different paradigm?
You nerd snipe them. Nerd snipe the shit out of them with cool things that are compelling. Create excitement.
I would sort of temper that and say that I try to come at my colleagues from a place of empathy and not from
I offer hugs
a
to my
supposition that I have all the answers, right, and that they're wrong. And so just because I love the things that I love doesn't mean that there are fantastic things that come from the place that they're going at. And even people that sometimes initially are quite obtuse or even can be perceived as aggressive.
Like me.
When approached that way, you can find common ground. And when you treat them with respect, then I think that you'll find that the great ideas that you both have will cross-pollinate, and you'll be able to not everyone's going to want to learn Haskell, right?
But
and they shouldn't. not everyone should, right? And not every problem is probably best solved with this tool. But I've found that when you operate from that way, the people on your team will become interested in your ideas. And on the team that I'm on right now, there's a pretty wide spectrum of people that are quite interested in functional concepts and people that are less interested in functional concepts. But from operating this way, my pull requests and merge requests have been accepted.
I mean, so actually, to even clarify that point more, what I think part of what you're saying, and maybe this was obvious to other people, is it's not about the language. It's about the ideas and techniques and the ways of specifying and describing and building your software that should be the important part anyways. Haskell as the tool, just like Haskell's job, is the symptom, not the cause or the goal, perhaps.
So I think that we, particularly in Haskell, would also do well to remember that a lot of people have some hostility towards Haskell as a language and towards our community because they have had some very bad interactions with members of our community. I've had those myself. And if you want to, probably half the time I spend on Twitter is trying to undo some of that damage. But I'm very sympathetic because I've had some of those interactions with members of the Haskell community myself who are, I don't know always if it's unwilling or unable to put themselves into the place of a beginner, somebody who's curious about Haskell but maybe doesn't have a lot of experience with mathematics, so they have no idea where some of this terminology is coming from. I didn't have any background with mathematics. I mean, the last math class I took was in 1992, and I hated it. And so for me, I have a lot of sympathy then for people who are, I mean, they've been programmers for a while, but they don't do anything particularly mathematical with programming, so a lot of this terminology is new. And I have a lot of sympathy for them, but I think we also have to recognize that we as a community have a bad reputation that is not always unjustified. And we have some work to do at outreach.
Yeah, intellectual rigor doesn't have to be achieved at the expense of kindness.
Yeah.
And also, if I remember correctly, functional programming languages, or at least Haskell, were listed in the Stack Overflow poll as one of the languages people would like to work in. So there might be quite high chance that your coworkers won't work in, or at least will give it a chance once you're kind.
Yes.
So it's always important to sort of be nice, talk about it, be kind, and be nice again, and sort of be inclusive, because if
diversity of thought and experience is important for a healthy team.
Yeah. And I think that pretty much answers your question, unless you have some follow-up.
That's very good.
Next question.
I thought we were going to rotate people.
Yeah, so I'm looking for a 3 on the random number
Yeah.
generator because it's a bird and it's always 1 or 2.
Just make it. Just do a rotation.
Well, we need someone to ask a question. Or maybe it could be,
one.
who just asked the question.
Oh,
Who was
I
it?
wouldn't want to replace any of my good speakers.
No, go on. This was actually 3. I was mistaken.
Meow is the random number generator we want.
Who leaves Meow?
Well,
Oh.
Yeah, I can just sit as the fifth member.
no, you can.
Yeah, just bring a chair.
So,
Do we have a new question yet?
Okay, let's do a random number generator for that as well.
Alright.
2. So you go
Oh.
instead of Jacob.
okay.
Okay.
Bye, Jacob.
I love this one.
Okay, but now we need a question.
This is why we're doing this conference to be a kings of everything.
I just wanted to ask, what do we think we can do to try and get more women involved in Haskell? I know there's a lot of men here, and that's great that we're here, but it'd be nice to see some more women involved too.
I think there's several different dimensions of this. I've been involved with this in the context of the workplace. I've been privy to some discussions in terms of Haskell.org and core stuff. Honestly, it's about being. You need to be proactively welcoming. You need to anyone who wants to learn, or anyone who has trouble. There's also what is motivating people to learn. Is it like why does someone want to learn? Okay, let me zoom out. There's several different stages of funnel at different levels of pre-existing technical maturity. Honestly, I don't have a single answer.
I'd like to chime in here a little bit. If you keep trying to do the same thing and expect different results, like there's this truism, right, that you're going to be disappointed, right? So if we keep only looking to try to expand the community with the same sorts of techniques that we've done before, we're going to see the same results. And the reality is that the field of computer science has become increasingly, since the 1960s, a hostile place for women. This hasn't happened by accident. It's happened because of specific policies, right? And so if we want to increase the number of women who are in our ranks, then we need to, at some level, find a way to work against those systemic issues. It's not going to be solved by just sending out more invites to meetups, unfortunately. It's a good idea, but this is a large problem that I don't think...
It's not just Haskell.
Not just Haskell.
But Haskell is extremely biased, I have to say.
Yeah. And
well, what kind of policies do you meet?
Oh, I'm both not qualified and don't want to hijack all of this, but I'd love to talk about this after. But I would just say that this is a systemic issue, and it's not specifically related to, I think, one programming language, as you say.
Yeah.
But certain of them may be more indicative or symptomatic of the problem than others. But some things that have been, I've seen personal success with, are trying to, in your companies, start up programs that can help mentor or attract people from non-traditional vectors into computer science or into the profession of computer programming.
Whether even if and it could be like pre-university programs.
Yes.
And that's actually probably I think there's two different issues. I'm
going to just keep going.
Yeah. Sorry.
And so, and so I think that by specifically reaching out to areas, going to where women are, hopefully with someone who is already involved in your group, who is a woman, can be very effective. So reaching out if there's a society of engineers at universities nearby, don't just go look for the computer scientists. See, like the chemical engineers and the physicists, they can do the work that we're doing just as well as any of us, right? And then beyond that, looking maybe at other areas of your company, if there are women who are working perhaps in technical support, QA, marketing, management that are interested in technical paths, try to create programs within your company, and then from those programs, express your love of functional programming, and the infection will spread. And in that way, that's been the most practical solution I've seen. At the Utah Haskell Group, one of the maintainers of the Haskell Group is a woman named Julia, and she does a fantastic job. And so I think it's just always a great idea to make sure that you actually are including women, and when you're reaching out to women, trying to include the women that are in your organization to make sure that it's actually their perspective that is being shared.
So finally the woman will.
Right.
So there are also, I don't know about in Europe, but in the States, like there are a lot of women who code meetups and groups, and functional programming has not done a lot of outreach to those groups. and we should, but again, it would be best if, like, there's also girl development, and there's a few others, and some of them have local groups as well. But one of the problems is that, you know, like he said, it's good if you actually have a woman representative of functional programming who goes to, you know, because they want to see some evidence that there are actually other women who write this language or who are in this community. And there are other women in Haskell. I know I'm not alone, but a lot of them are not very visible and kind of quiet and keep to themselves and don't do a lot of outreach. And so, so these groups have a lot of meetups that we just don't ever go and get involved in. And so I think that's a thing that we could do a better job of and get them excited about Haskell. Because, you know, with functional programming, so much of it is just going to, like we've been talking about, right, a lot of it comes from the individual getting excited about it and learning it, and then, you know, then it starts to spread. So in addition to the, you know, systemic issues and stuff like that, I think that's really something we could do. There is an appetite for learning it, but, and as we've talked about a little bit too, there are some particularly off-putting things about some of the people and some of the very visible people in the Haskell community. There are things that are a little off-putting to women, and which is unfortunate. So whatever you can do to sort of elevate the voices and presence of people who are not off-putting to women, that would probably help too. Do you want to?
Sure, yeah. I think listening to the women, you know, is well, it's funny, but I mean, this is a diverse panel, but I've seen all male panels being asked these questions, and it feels like this isolated chamber of, oh, where are all the women? You know, well, let's rationalize some decisions, but ultimately you have to. I know loads of women who do Haskell. A lot of them are involved in the community, some of them aren't. But ultimately, if you know a woman and she's a programmer, maybe ask her. You know, if she's a Haskeller, does she go to these events? Why not? If she's a Clojure or Python person, is she interested in Haskell? Why not? I think yeah, we have the systemic issues, but also the individual, personal issues, kind of. Yeah.
Non-anthropological questions, anyone?
Chris.
So you talked before about you know, not necessarily adopting Haskell, but language sort of becoming functional, right? But like, okay, maybe this is more of a question about your emotions than a technical one. How do you feel when a language like ReasonML comes out? Like, is it exciting that the world's becoming more functional, or is it disappointing that we're not just switching to Haskell?
I'll start. It's cool that people have tools they like, and that they don't make me angry when I read the design. I mean, it's, you know, people like different color inks. They work great for different types of lighting and surfaces. You know, I just happen to be very involved in sort of the ink manufacturing for one that I happen to like to use, you know. If people have tools they like and they're excited to share them and they enjoy what they enable them to do, awesome. Nothing else matters, does it?
Yeah, I think it's nice to have more languages which are on the spectrum between dynamically typed and really intense types. We had like Elm as a nice entry language, and now potentially ReasonML, more familiar syntax for non-functional programmers. Maybe yeah, that's gonna get more people interested, and especially with a company like Facebook backing it. I'm sure there's gonna be some, at least it's gonna be long-term supported. People can trust that it's gonna be stable, so fully support it.
Yeah, I like the sentiment that Carter shared there.
I appreciate it.
Where the adoption of Reason doesn't prevent me from writing Haskell. Right?
Doesn't prevent anyone else.
Or anyone else, right? And so...
It's a non-zero-sum game, I guess.
Exactly, yes. And so while, you know, I definitely have been forming opinions about the way, like the ideal ways in which I would program, and particularly working on the front end, you know, I would much rather be able to fully see, you know, latch on to something like PureScript and see something that is much closer to Haskell and gain mainstream adoption. And if I had Zuckerberg's money, I probably would be throwing that around to make something like that happen. But in the meantime, yeah, just I think that we don't know what the future is going to hold, and I think all of these things, all of this is, I truly believe that all of this is innovation in a direction, in a forward-facing direction.
And like you yourself, because when I met you, you swore you'd never give up Scala. So like most of our students, most of my students, most of the readers of Haskell book came from they were writing Java, and then Scala is a little bit better than Java, and then they started doing FP and Scala because of the Red Book, and it's a little bit better than regular Scala. And then they kind of come down the line and then like, okay, now it's time to just learn Haskell. And I've seen that happen with Elm as well. I've seen it happen with some other languages. And I'm not necessarily saying that everybody should learn Haskell or everybody should write Haskell. I think that Elm is great for, in the context in which it's used. Reason ML is also interesting and great. So I think all of these developments are great, but it seems to always come back to, all right, I finally should just learn Haskell and see, even if I'm going to keep writing Elm or whatever, they want to see where all these ideas came from, I think, and see them in their sort of, I don't want to say purest form, because, but where these ideas sort of, Haskell's kind of the incubator for all of this stuff happening, I think, and so it seems to always lead people to learn Haskell.
More technical or non-anthropological questions?
Well, this is about the future of functional programming, which is...
it's
I
both.
think,
but we've been talking about a lot of social dynamics and work environment.
Yeah,
questions.
What's the thing you hate most about Haskell?
Oh, no.
You just don't like numbers, that's another thing.
No, but I mean, even if you do like numbers, I think maybe especially if you like numbers, the numeric type classes, and num in particular, are, there's, I guess for me the thing is probably something that num more symbolizes than anything else, or like the default type class that he was talking about, right? This kind of, I think some people get into type class abuse, and Haskell enables those people.
One of the things that I struggle with is just language pragmas and extensions. It's sometimes hard to tell, what ones are out there, what ones are available, what ones I should be using. When I first started out, it's been something that I've actually struggled with since I first started, and there's the overloaded strings pragma that, and it's not always obvious if you're not if you're looking at somebody else's work, they don't always say which ones they're using, and if you're experienced, perhaps it's obvious, but when you try to run that code, it's not. And then also just in general, sometimes trying to run the code example, I guess that sort of expands out to a greater one where it's difficult sometimes if you see code online to know how old it is, and when you try to run it as a beginner and it doesn't run, you can't tell if it's because you've done something wrong with your environment or perhaps a different GHC version or incompatible dependencies. It would be nice as someone who's a beginner to intermediate to have things a little bit clearer there, but I don't know if it's something I want to see change in the language or if it can, but it's something I struggle with or that frustrates me.
I like everything about Haskell. I guess for me, I don't know, not so much hate. I mean, when you experiment with things like Idris, Ragday, you start getting used to those abstractions, and then you come back in Haskell, and you're like, oh, why don't we have dependent types? But I think a lot of the recent things happening is that these things are kind of trickling out as well, and I find that dependent types, for example, would make the extensions issues easier because they would generalize a lot of the extensions that currently you need. So I guess it's just being patient and waiting for the new Haskell report, maybe, which.
We need to get on that. But that said, actually, this raises a good point, which is community involvement in sort of improving. I mean, there's like a GHC proposals thing that has pretty decent activity. I will say that there's issues with the num type class, but I haven't seen any cure that's worse than the disease. Because at some point you have to make a choice about which abstractions are the right granularity for your domain, and whatever. In terms of personal problems, the syntax error reporting could be a little bit less confusing sometimes. I know that those of you who saw me live coding a few days ago, I definitely find that, I can find it eventually, but it's a little bit confusing sometimes, in the same style that you look at the wrong line, but not as bad as the C look at the wrong line issues, because it's usually near where you are. But like a fun example is when I do equal then a lambda, but I don't do a space in between. That one always confuses me. One sort of even more sort of engineering-y one is the way GHC does optimization and inlining, it can never backtrack or back out a choice if it realizes it was bad. That's sort of more of an engineering research problem than a thing, but there's stuff like that, or what would happen if we just used a JIT instead, and we just did all this optimization when we actually used the code. There's all sorts of stuff like that. But on the other extreme, dependent types are awesome, and they really give you a big vocabulary, great new dimension of vocabulary. But also, you sometimes have to struggle with how do you have good reuse with your dependently typed code. And there are really cool things people are doing, like ornaments is one vein of work people were doing for a while. Like, how do you do generic programming or reusable abstractions or code reuse in dependently typed settings? It's really hard. The more precise your specification is, the less it fits other specifications. That's the cost of specifying. And there are really interesting research programs around that. I don't know. It'd be nice if there were more core contributors, because we could always be better off with more smart people helping out, making things nicer.
One thing though, Lawrence actually got it free, so we'll have to switch him in. Let's see who goes. Julie.
I've not been voted off the island yet.
It's all in the crossing borders.
It's only the what?
Crossing price.
Oh. Every time he rolls the dice, you spawn a new committee in a different dimension.
More questions. Questions.
So I have a question.
Excellent.
So there was a question about which parts of a Haskell you didn't like. And so I wanted to ask, what was the piece of Haskell code you wrote recently, what you were most happy about, or most proud about, or you sort of had this sort of awesome moment which gave you a thought like, oh, this is the reason why I use Haskell?
I think that was Tuesday for me. For those in particular, I was sort of trying to do a very boiled down, very minimal sort of functional programming exposition of all the standard connectives and linear logic in sort of a easy, reusable, micro demo way. And I don't know, gadgets were kind of key for some of this stuff to even be describable. I do miss having infix-friendly type variables. We used to have those about 5 to 8 years ago, but they're gone for technical reasons I don't remember. Probably that.
And also, Kuba is coming back.
Sweet.
I guess the recent one was PureScript for me. I guess it's close enough. I was working on a UI for a personal project, and I was trying out this technique of structuring it using a hierarchy of free monads. And some time ago, when I was first getting into functional programming, I tried doing this, and it was way too complicated at the time. And this time I was able to figure it out, and it was amazing. It was easy to use. It felt much safer. It was a nice refactor, so I was pretty happy with that construction.
For part of my presentation here, I worked on a small Haskell program that looks at sort of a basic assembly and shoots out machine code. And I'd originally written this as part of a presentation for local Haskell meetup, and I was working on it, and I'd only run it on very small programs, min, max, add, things that were sort of like 15 lines or less. And I wanted to demonstrate it with larger, and so I fed in this a game program which was around closer to 40,000 lines of code, and I ran my Haskell program, and it parsed, and machine code came out, and I ran it, and nothing happened. And I was like a little bit concerned, because a lot of times what you hear with Haskell is like, if it compiles, it works. But parsing is essentially string to string, and something had gotten messed up. And at this point, I was probably, I think, like 6 or 7 minutes away from when the meetup was starting, and I really wanted to impress my friends, and so I was feeling quite anxious. And I looked at the code, and I realized that there was a single character in this larger source file that I had not taken into account. And I was able to go to just the single one function that dealt with that part of the assembly language, add that single character back in, and I ran it, and it worked. And I thought, what other language is this possible? The only tool that I would have used besides the parser combinators would have been regular expressions, and most of the time I don't even understand those while I'm writing them, much less if I have to go back and modify them. And also having the assurance that the entire rest of my syntax tree was intact, which is super cool. And then when I ran it and I saw the game running, then it was that nice visual feedback of something working. So I think that is the thing that I've been most excited about recently.
I think for me it was a mix of refactoring and also parsing. I had this, we have this project, it's a small CLI utility we use at work. What it does is not important, but the config file needed to change, and also some of the logic. So adding that was a matter of, well, it took about 4 hours or something. It was not a lot, but how you could do it was amazing, because it was just change the data type, fix compiler errors, use the new field in the location that you actually want to use it, and then change the parser, and then it was done. And all right, it didn't work exactly because I broke an integration test, but that was easily fixed, and it was a very, very painless way of doing this stuff. And that was, again, that was a nice reminder.
Questions?
I've got another one. So what are you guys excited about for the future of functional programming, be that in Haskell or any other language? Like especially stuff that's kind of coming along the horizon in the next few years.
I don't know so much about features, but I'm excited about the adoption. I think if more people get to use this stuff, we can have less software that breaks, and a lot of software breaks. And in terms of that, I think there's a large amount of potential to be uncovered, because a lot of software is written, and a lot of it is written badly. And we can, as an industry, do better. And the potential here is one of the reasons I'm really interested in the language.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much to say, but I don't know a ton of the things that are coming down in the future. I myself am personally just excited to write more and more of it, hopefully contribute to more open source projects, and learn from all of you, expand the community, keep in touch with the friends that we've made at this conference, and continue to make new ones, and see also more events like these. I think that this chance to get together in a situation where we can learn together over an extended period of time has been really special, and I think that I look forward to more of these.
I guess I'm liking the research happening with linear type systems, and being able to model interactive programs in a nice way. That's interesting, because most programs I write end up being interactive in some way. It'd be nice to have language features which are kind of more able to reflect that kind of domain.
So one thing that I'm Well, I don't dabble in myself, but I'm interested to see how it works out, is to see some core components of our software stack getting rewritten to versions that are probably safe.
Deep spec. Are you talking about deep spec?
I was actually talking about
CompCert?
no, the TLS. It was the sort of certified TLS stack from Microsoft.
Oh, that had a CVE from the side channel thing last week.
Did it?
I think so, or I read the list wrong.
Okay. Anyhow, because every now and again we hear about new security bugs popping up, and it'll be nice to see how a version of a library that we can probably show that is secure will work out in a while, because it's one thing is actually finishing that part, but seeing how it will work with the other, I mean, how it will actually work in a while will be interesting to see.
Joining the panel.
Was there anybody wanting to ask a question?
Yeah.
Last 10 minutes or something.
Wacky questions are cool too.
Yeah.
Ask weird questions, please. It'll be fun.
Do you have a weird question?
No. I'm too shy. I
So-
cannot do this.
Yeah.
I have a question, especially for those of you who do write Haskell at work. One, I mean, those, you don't have to be the only people who answer, but if you do, one of the things I see come up when people are talking about writing Haskell at work is that there are people, different people on their Haskell team want to sort of write a different dialect of Haskell. And depending on which extensions they have turned on and so forth, they might even be almost mutually unintelligible dialects of Haskell. And I think that one of the things we've been talking about that we're not really sure what is a good answer for that is sort of how to kind of manage that. So if you're like the team leader or something, or if you have a team leader, do they specify like which extensions are okay in this at your work, or?
Should I be answering this question then?
No.
I can take it too.
I think we have some people here who can answer it.
So the thing we did when we got started was no language extensions allowed whatsoever. And well, we discovered rather quickly that there's some of them that are okay, and that you really want to use. So what happened roughly was, okay, we have this language and we want to have code that people can understand, so we write the most stupid version of Haskell with as little abstraction as possible and trying to see how far that gets us. And at a certain point, you realize, okay, we want certain niceties because we don't only want like the type checking that's available in the language, but we don't want to have to pack and unpack strings every time. So then there's a clear case for a language extension, and for every individual case, and this still happens, when somebody turns on a language extension, they have to make their case for it, and it's on a source file basis, so, and with a nice interface, and then people can use it without knowing what the extension does, if we're lucky, the extension allows for that. And that's sort of the way we've managed that.
So do people want me to also opine or not?
Just do it.
Okay. So I think that there's very few extensions that actually I've seen really conflict with each other. If you have code that you can't adapt to other code, that's an engineering problem and a failure of your team to work together. I've seen people write really bad code. So I think that it's useful to have a senior person on the team who has opinions about style and what is a rabbit hole and what isn't, and sort of say, that doesn't really change how we do things, I don't care, whatever, or no, that's going to blow up in someone's face, please don't touch it that way. I think that, it turns into really just how do you manage complexity and make sure everyone understands your code base. If the code literally can't talk with itself, There's a deeper issue than what language extension used. And I think that it just is the same as, any other tool. You should have a discussion, make sure that people can understand stuff. I actually prefer explicit language extensions because it's not C++. Most programming languages have sort of an implicit, all the things are available approach. Haskell actually, 5-10 years ago, had F allow Glasgow X. You're near Glasgow, so you know about this, right?
Yeah.
So what was the issue with F Glasgow XX?
That was before my time.
Okay, so I was somehow using Haskell when people were still doing this weird thing. It made every language extension enabled at once, and what those were changed over time because some were experimental. So you'd have silent breakage. I actually find that with recent GHC, it's very explicit. Hey, you're trying to write this sort of thing. You might want to use this sort of flag. And then I just copy and paste it. It's not an interesting discussion. If you can't, writing code that can't fit with each other, that's an issue in any tool. And you should be having a bigger discussion than just what flags to set or why didn't anyone ever review code. There's that famous phrase, programs are meant to be read by humans and secondarily executed by a computer. C++ and assembly sort of belie that, I think, but at the end of the day, it's a tool for communication and description. If it's hard for people on your team to understand a thing, maybe it's a bad idea to do that for those colleagues unless you're uplifting them or just you're eating pain so they never have to. Good library engineering in a team context is about consuming or destroying a piece of pain once so no one else sees it ever again. That's what an abstraction is. It robustly guards against some sort of pain.
Yeah, that sort of applies to any sort of engineering practice. In my experience, I do programming language research, so a lot of times I try to write a DSL in Haskell that solves my problem. I capture the domain and I simply write a language that solves that domain. Most of the time that's fine, as long as you're not under a time constraint and you don't want to sort of write something that works as fast as possible. Then you can give yourself some leeway and see, and just stick to IO monad and just write anything in the most hacky way possible and see how it behaves, because that will further your understanding of the domain. And with regards to the extensions, I think most of them are fine as long as you stay away from those that make your type checking undecidable or sort of open.
Undecidable instances is usually safe. Never do allow ambiguous types, ever. That's a bad touch. But I think that's the main one that's evil.
Yeah, probably.
Oh, and impregnative types doesn't work. Only use rank up types. Impregnative types isn't supported.
And when will once Haskell 2020 gets finished, will we get some new version of dialect with all nice things?
So there's been some. I've been trying to focus on sort of certain other pieces, but one interesting part of the discussion about whether you include scope type variables or not is, the design of scope type variables is actually from the context of we don't want to break code that's already there. If this is a new Haskell revision, should it be really constrained by that choice? Or is it, you have to sort of, how do the quantifiers work now? I think there was some email activity or proposal activity around that. I think that there's...
Actually, we have a question here.
Yes? Hello?
Within the
that'll be the last question.
All right. Within the Python community, there's a really strong sense of what is Pythonic and what's not.
Is that PEP 308 or something, or 380?
PEP 8. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. There is a document basically specifying large parts of that consensus, and I was wondering if the panel would like something similar for Haskell or any FP programming.
So I've spoken with people who are really into PEP 8, And I was like, wait, so style is like about data structure and stuff? They're like, no, it's formatting your file. And I think that, and there's actually been some good Stack Overflow discussions around this. In Haskell, it's different. When people talk about style, or at least interesting discussions of style, are about how you encode data types and stuff.
So Tab 8 is about style, but then there is this...
Formatting style, or like data structure, or way you...
Mostly formatting style, but then there is also a small document basically specifying 10 rules, which your code should adhere to, and that's not formatting related.
Okay, what are those 10 rules?
No idea.
I don't think you follow PEP 8. I mean, so like, I think that...
Yes.
What?
Like explicit is better than implicit and all that kind of stuff.
So, how's that work well? That doesn't work well with type classes. Oh, well, okay.
So,
would you like to see a similar written down consensus for Haskell? That's my question.
No. There's two
I
ways
think
around.
that's a difficult question.
For example, import this struct is better than nested. And Haskell clearly does that.
No, I'm not saying that we should adopt the same method, but yeah.
Something like it'd be, you know,
I think
like Tab 8 or whatever it is, but for Haskell, right?
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
All right. I think that's a difficult question because a lot of people in this community have strong opinions about how they write software, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think we can as a community, do better with how you like solve common problems and help in that regard. When I first got started, I didn't know what to do when I was in an I/O monad and a bunch of maybes, and then you can use some very nice functions from control.monad in order to clear up the logic and make it like less about handling cases. I think a bunch of those things might be nice, and I would have liked to have them when I was learning the language. And I think, and I'm still learning the language, obviously, I'm still learning it stuff, so I still like to be told how to solve certain problems, and that I think we can do better with as defining, like, this is the stuff you look at first, and then you can go in whichever direction you want and do all sorts of crazy things.
I think a clearer set of well-defined best practices would be very helpful for me.
Formatting or like design?
No, design.
Yeah.
Design.
Oh.
Program design and yeah.
I know HLint gets pretty fancy. Does that maybe encompass or are you talking about more than that? What it can even do?
I've recently started using HLint more and more, and I've been very impressed by the kinds of recommendations that it makes well above formatting. And so, yes, in that direction.
So I will say this, HLint is, you have to bring your own opinions to bear on its suggestions, because they're guidelines, not what you must do.
No tool will replace your brain.
Exactly.
I'd also like to just chime in real quick on the issue of sort of like writing Haskell that is indecipherable to other people on your team. This is not a problem that is specific to Haskell, and most programming languages allow for writing the types of programs that quickly become unmaintainable. And I think one of the best things to do is to make sure that you have junior and intermediate programmers on your team as well as senior programmers, and make sure that your environment is such that your junior programmers are not afraid to ask questions or demonstrate that when they don't understand, and that your applications should be written 99.9% of the time in such a way that the junior programmer can explain it back to you and can explain it well enough to be a responsible approver for that pull request. There are, I think, going to be a small amount of times where clever or techniques need to be, sometimes you need to talk to a machine like a machine, and that's okay. And at that point you should have annotated in your programming the reasons why you made that decision and what the purposes was for and how you, the resources that you learned to get to it. But besides that, when programming on a commercial project, it is always better to be clearer to beginners. And if you don't have beginners on your team, then you are going to lose the perspective of what it feels like to read code for the first time. And this is a principle that is not unique to Haskell, and I think when we write programs, we should not be writing it for ourselves, but for the people who come later. And this has been, I think, a good guiding principle for me and the teams I've been on.
Okay.
So thanks everyone on the panel and all the previous members of the panel and all the members that will insert the panel. So I'd like to close this summer school by giving the huge thank you to everyone coming here and taking part in our little experiment into making a longer time frame based learning environment for Haskell. And it seems that a lot of you have made some friends and have met some people that you wouldn't have otherwise met, and you've seen there's a lot of other people interested in Haskell, some experts, some not, and that's great. And I'd also love to thank all of the speakers. The event wouldn't be possible without you, and the amount of work and effort and dedication you've put into making this happen is, it's all basically because of you. So thank you a lot. We're going to circulate a list of thoughts.
Email?
Well, yes, it's going to be in an email form, but there's going to be a link into Google Forms where you'll be able to say any things you loved, any things you didn't like. We are going to read it. It's extremely important to us because this is a first edition. We made it in a way that suits us best, but we really want to have something that suits people who attended best. So really, like any opinion you have, even if it's bad, it's still very valuable, and we're going to read it and we're going to apply it. And we're also like to thank our sponsors who have funded free scholarship programs to people who wouldn't otherwise be able to attend this summer school. It was very important to us to make it approachable and available to people who otherwise would have had no way of attending it. So that's a huge thanks to the sponsors. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot. And yes, Julie?
I have one complaint.
Yes.
That it was so good that now I have to come back to Poland every summer.
Well, we can certainly answer that. So yes, thank you. And